When a woman carries a queen mindset, she doesn't operate from scarcity, fear, or desperation. She operates from standards, clarity, and self-respect. This video breaks down the subtle behaviors she never does for a man because her value isn't up for negotiation and her energy is too precious to waste. A woman with a queen mindset never abandons her standards just because she likes a man, and this isn't because she is stubborn or difficult, but because she understands the foundation of self-respect. Her standards are not rules she invented to impress anyone. They are boundaries built from her experiences, her values, and her understanding of what brings her peace. When she meets someone she's attracted to, she doesn't suddenly forget who she is or what she deserves. She doesn't soften her expectations in the hope that doing so will make someone stay. She knows that any relationship that requires her to lower herself is already asking her to lose herself, and that is a price she refuses to pay. She understands that temporary excitement should never cost her long-term stability. So even when she feels a strong emotional pull, even when her heart wants to move quickly, she takes a step back and evaluates. She looks at how a man shows up, not just how he talks. She pays attention to consistency, to the way he handles pressure, to the way he speaks about others, to the way he treats people who have nothing to offer him. She doesn't allow charm to blind her from patterns. She doesn't allow chemistry to override common sense. She is fully aware that connection without compatibility is chaos waiting to happen. So she protects her standards the same way she protects her peace. She knows that a man who is right for her will not be intimidated by her expectations. He will be aligned with them. If her standards feel like pressure to someone, that simply means he is not prepared to meet the level of responsibility that comes with access to her life. She never engages in emotional discounts. She doesn't excuse bad behavior just because she likes someone. She doesn't rewrite reality to make a situation look better than it is. She doesn't tell herself he is trying when he is clearly inconsistent. She doesn't call bare minimum effort meaningful. She doesn't let loneliness convince her that low-quality treatment is acceptable. She knows that abandoning her standards is a slow unraveling of self-worth, and she refuses to betray herself to keep someone else comfortable. When something feels off, she pays attention. When something hurts her, she doesn't silence herself. She communicates openly, but she doesn't beg for change. She gives someone the opportunity to rise, but she never drags them there. She understands the difference between patience and self-abandonment. She knows when to give time and when to walk away. Her standards also extend to the emotional environment around her. She expects honesty, reliability, communication, and effort, not perfection, but intentionality. She values a man who shows respect without needing to be asked. She values a man who chooses her with clarity instead of confusion. If he cannot meet these basic expectations, she withdraws gracefully. She doesn't create drama. She doesn't lash out. She doesn't throw accusations. She simply detaches. Her presence is earned through consistency, not charm. Her loyalty is earned through action, not promises. She knows that if she has to lower her expectations to keep a man, she will also have to lower her happiness to keep the relationship alive. This mindset allows her to move with confidence, not fear. She never worries about losing a man by maintaining her standards, because she knows that the right man will not be lost. She knows her value is not fragile or dependent on another person. She doesn't chase, she doesn't compete, she doesn't beg for recognition. She shows up exactly as she is and allows a man to reveal whether he fits her world or not. If he doesn't, she lets him go without hesitation. She has learned that the cost of compromising her standards is far greater than the cost of walking away. And because of that, she stands firm in who she is, trusting that the right connection will never require her to shrink herself or settle for less than she deserves. A woman with a queen mindset never overgives to prove she is worthy because she understands that love is not something earned through effort, sacrifice, or self-abandonment. She doesn't perform for affection or try to secure her place in someone's life by constantly giving more than she receives. She knows that when someone genuinely values her, they will meet her halfway without being pushed, persuaded, or compensated with endless acts of service. Instead of trying to win approval, she stands firmly in the truth that her worth is inherent. She doesn't pour her time, energy, or emotional labor into someone who hasn't shown they deserve it. She doesn't try to be everything for a man just so he won't leave, because she knows if he only stays when she's overfunctioning, he was never truly there to begin with. Her giving is intentional, not desperate, and she chooses to invest in people who actually invest back. She understands that overgiving usually comes from fear, fear of losing someone, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced, and she refuses to let fear run her relationships. She has trained herself to pause before reacting, to check whether she's acting from confidence or insecurity. If she catches herself offering too much too soon, she recalibrates. She doesn't try to earn attention by being overly supportive, overly available, or overly accommodating. She knows that the moment she starts giving from a place of anxiety, she is no longer being genuine. She knows that giving should be natural, not strategic. So she gives with a full heart, but she doesn't deplete herself. She helps, but she doesn't rescue. She cares, but she doesn't carry the entire relationship on her shoulders. She loves deeply, but she never loses herself in the process. She is very aware of how easy it is for people to take advantage of a generous woman, so she pays attention to patterns. If she notices that she is the one always planning, always initiating, always checking in, always solving problems, always smoothing over conflicts, she steps back. She refuses to be the emotional engine that keeps a half-interested man engaged. She understands that when she overgives, she teaches someone to undergive. She teaches someone that her needs can wait, that her boundaries can bend, that her love can be taken for granted. And she refuses to teach those lessons. So she allows space for a man to show what he is willing to bring to the table. She doesn't fill in the gaps for him. She doesn't compensate for his lack of effort. She doesn't confuse potential with reality. She watches how he behaves when she stops overextending, and that tells her everything she needs to know. She has also learned that genuine connection is built on reciprocity. She values mutual investment, mutual respect, and mutual effort. She doesn't need grand gestures, but she expects balance. She expects emotional responsibility. She expects genuine contribution. And if she doesn't get that, she doesn't push harder. She doesn't convince herself that giving more will somehow inspire him to change. She knows that relationships are not projects, and she is not a rehabilitation center for men who cannot match her energy. So she releases situations where her giving becomes a burden instead of a blessing. She steps away from dynamics where her love is consumed but never returned. She honors the part of herself that wants to nurture, but she also protects the part of herself that deserves to be nurtured too. Her strength lies in her restraint. She knows that holding back what is sacred is just as powerful as giving. She knows that the right man will never require her to exhaust herself emotionally. The right man will not confuse her effort with obligation. The right man will not let her carry the relationship alone. And until that man shows up, she keeps her energy guarded. She keeps her heart grounded. She gives slowly, intentionally, and only to someone who has consistently shown through actions, not words, that he values what she brings to his life. A woman with a queen mindset never tolerates inconsistency or mixed signals because she understands that clarity is a form of respect, and confusion is a sign of emotional immaturity. She knows that a man who wants to be in her life will show that desire through consistent actions, not sporadic attention or empty promises. When she encounters inconsistency, she doesn't chase after explanations or try to decode unclear behavior. She doesn't rewrite the story to make excuses for him or convince herself that he is simply busy, overwhelmed, or misunderstood. She reads the situation exactly as it is. If he shows up only when it's convenient for him, she notices. If he withdraws emotionally and returns only when he feels like it, she pays attention. She doesn't wait around hoping his behavior will magically stabilize. She knows that inconsistency is a pattern, not an accident, and she refuses to build her emotional life around someone who cannot show up with reliability. She understands that mixed signals are a deliberate communication style for some people, a way of keeping her emotionally invested without offering real commitment. She won't allow herself to be stuck in a cycle where she feels wanted one moment and ignored the next. She doesn't allow her heart to be toyed with or her emotions to be manipulated by unpredictable effort. When someone's intentions fluctuate, she doesn't cling tighter, she distances herself. She knows that her peace is worth more than the temporary high of being chosen only part-time. She would rather walk away than sit in confusion, refreshing old conversations, replaying moments in her head, or trying to figure out what she did wrong. She knows that consistency does not require explanation. It reveals itself through steady presence, reliability, and emotional availability. She is deeply aware that inconsistency creates insecurity. It causes doubt, overthinking, and emotional turbulence. And because she knows her value, she refuses to allow a relationship dynamic that undermines her confidence. She doesn't stay attached to someone who gives her crumbs of affection and calls it effort. She doesn't accept hot and cold behavior as passion. She doesn't glorify unpredictability as mystery. She knows that mixed signals only feel exciting to a heart that is starving, and her heart is not starving. She feeds herself with self-respect, self-love, and emotional stability. So when someone shows her inconsistent behavior, she doesn't feel flattered by his occasional interest. She sees it for what it is, and she removes herself from the emotional roller coaster before it derails her sense of worth. She also understands that consistency is not about grand gestures or constant communication. It's about emotional steadiness. A man who is consistent doesn't disappear when things get difficult. He doesn't become unavailable when responsibility is required. He doesn't treat her like a priority only when he's lonely or bored. Instead, he shows up with intentional effort. He communicates openly. He follows through on what he says. And he does this not because she demands it, but because she inspires it through the standards she sets for herself. A queen mindset teaches her that she doesn't need to remind a grown man how to treat her. She doesn't beg for consistency. She doesn't plead for clarity. She allows his behavior to speak, and she listens carefully to what it says. She understands that clarity brings emotional safety. She values stability because it supports her growth, her creativity, and her peace. She knows that inconsistent people drain her energy and weaken her emotional grounding, so she avoids relationships that feel unpredictable or unstable. She chooses partners who bring calmness to her world rather than chaos. She chooses connections that offer transparency rather than confusion. She chooses people who make her feel seen and chosen, not doubted and insecure. And she chooses to leave situations where consistency is negotiable because she refuses to build a future on shaky ground. A woman with a queen mindset never makes a man the center of her life because she understands that her identity, purpose, and sense of fulfillment must come from within, not from a relationship. She knows that love can be a beautiful addition to her world, but it is never the foundation of her world. She refuses to shrink her ambitions, abandon her passions, or rearrange her entire existence around one person, no matter how deeply she cares for him. She learned early that placing a man at the center of her life creates an emotional imbalance where she ends up giving more than she receives, waiting for him to validate her worth and relying on him to determine her happiness. And she refuses to hand over that kind of power. She understands that a man can complement her life, but he should never consume it. She has built a life she is proud of, a life filled with goals, friendships, family bonds, routines, and personal growth. These things existed long before he arrived, and they continue to matter even when she is in love. She doesn't cancel her priorities to accommodate his preferences. She doesn't abandon her hobbies to mirror his interests. She doesn't drop her responsibilities just to be available for him. She maintains her independence because she knows that losing herself for the sake of a relationship eventually leads to resentment, insecurity, and emotional dependence. She values the identity she created through her experiences, her struggles, and her achievements, and she refuses to dilute it to fit into someone else's expectations. She also understands that making a man the center of her life places unfair pressure on him. No one can carry the weight of being someone's entire source of happiness. When she maintains her own world, she allows the relationship to breathe. She loves fully, but she doesn't suffocate. She supports deeply, but she doesn't smother. She shows up with loyalty, but she doesn't expect him to fill every emotional gap. She wants a partnership, not possession. She wants two whole individuals choosing each other, not two incomplete people clinging to each other out of fear. So she keeps her emotional balance intact by nurturing her own life just as much as she nurtures the relationship. She gives space for healthy individuality, and she expects the same in return. She knows that time apart strengthens connection, that personal goals fuel confidence, and that independence keeps attraction alive. She is not threatened by his ambition, friendships, or interests because she has her own. She doesn't depend on constant reassurance, nor does she require the relationship to occupy every corner of her attention. Her life has depth outside of romance. She prioritizes her education, her career, her health, her peace, and her dreams, and she doesn't feel guilty for doing so. She knows that the right man will respect her drive rather than resent it. He will appreciate that she has her own path rather than expecting her to walk only his. When she enters a relationship, she remains grounded in who she is. She keeps her priorities aligned. She protects her time and energy. She maintains her friendships and nurtures the people who matter to her. She continues to invest in her personal growth, and she doesn't let her world shrink simply because a relationship has entered the picture. She has learned that love thrives when two complete individuals come together, not when one person dissolves into the other. She knows that a queen never steps off her throne to orbit around someone else. She invites someone to stand beside her, but she never abandons her own center. A woman with a queen mindset never sacrifices her emotional peace to maintain a relationship because she understands that peace is not optional, it is essential. She knows that the moment she starts compromising her inner calm to keep someone close, she is entering a space where love becomes survival instead of connection. She refuses to accept a dynamic where her mind is constantly unsettled, her heart is always anxious, or her spirit feels drained. She doesn't normalize emotional chaos. She doesn't romanticize turmoil. She doesn't stay in situations that make her feel small, confused, or overwhelmed. She has learned that protecting her peace is protecting her power, and no relationship is worth losing that for. So when she feels her emotional stability slipping, she pays attention. She doesn't push the discomfort aside. She doesn't silence her intuition. She allows herself to acknowledge what is happening, even when it is difficult to face. She understands that love should not feel like walking on eggshells. She doesn't tolerate a relationship where she has to repeatedly explain her boundaries, defend her feelings, or justify why she deserves respect. She doesn't chase after emotional clarity that a man refuses to give. She doesn't accept apologies without change, nor does she get stuck in cycles where she is constantly trying to fix what someone else keeps breaking. Her heart may be patient, but it is not a doormat. She knows that emotional peace comes from consistency, honesty, and mutual respect. And if those elements don't exist, she removes herself. She will always choose temporary heartbreak over long term emotional suffering because she knows that nothing grows in a storm that never ends. She has learned how subtle the erosion of peace can be. It starts with small compromises, ignoring red flags, accepting excuses, tolerating disrespect framed as stress or misunderstanding, giving the benefit of the doubt when it is no longer deserved. Little by little, emotional weight begins to pile up, but unlike the version of herself she once was, she now recognizes the warning signs early. When she feels herself becoming anxious in ways she never used to be, she evaluates the source. When she finds herself overthinking, over-explaining, or over-accommodating, she steps back. When she notices her sleep, mood, or confidence shifting because of someone's inconsistency or disrespect, she listens to her body. Her peace is her compass, and she trusts it with unwavering loyalty. She also understands that her emotional peace isn't just about herself. It affects her work, her relationships with others, her health, and her future. She knows that a relationship that drains her will eventually bleed into every other area of her life. So she protects her inner world with intention. She surrounds herself with people who add emotional clarity, not confusion. She chooses environments that strengthen her self-worth rather than weaken it. She invests in experiences that nurture her growth instead of triggering her insecurities. She has become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. She knows that not everyone deserves access to her emotional space, and she guards it with care. She doesn't believe in staying in relationships out of fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of losing someone she once cared for. She knows that peace is not found in clinging to what hurts, but in letting go of what disturbs her spirit. She has learned that choosing herself isn't selfish, it is necessary. She chooses emotional stability over unpredictable affection. She chooses truth over potential. She chooses alignment over attachment. She chooses a future where her heart can flourish instead of one where it constantly fights to survive. She knows that a queen never hands over her peace as a bargaining chip for love. She carries it like a crown, and she protects it with the strength of someone who finally understands her worth.